It's the year 1519. You've crossed jungles, mountains, and hostile territory. You expect to find scattered villages. Instead, you see this: a vast city rising from the middle of a lake. Stone causeways stretching for miles across open water, canals packed with canoes, white temples towering above everything, markets louder and larger than anything you've seen in Europe. This is Tenochtitlan, and at this moment, it is one of the largest cities on Earth. When Spanish conquistadors first arrived, they estimated its population at over 200,000 people. That made it larger than London, Paris, or Rome at the same time. But this city wasn't supposed to exist at all. Tenochtitlan was built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. No solid ground, no rivers flowing through it, no metal tools, no wheeled transport. And yet, somehow, it worked. What you're seeing here is not legend, it's not myth. This reconstruction is based on archaeology, colonial records, and indigenous accounts. Because Tenochtitlan wasn't a fantasy city, it was a system. The story begins centuries earlier. According to Mexican tradition, their ancestors were wanderers. They were searching for a sign from their god, Huitzilopochtli. That sign was specific: an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. They found it here, on a small marshy island in the lake. Most groups would have kept moving. The Mexica stopped. In 1325, they began building. At first, the settlement was fragile: wooden structures, mud foundations, constant flooding. But over generations, the city expanded outward layer by layer. Stone replaced wood, causeways replaced canoes, neighborhoods formed, and slowly, impossibly, the island became a metropolis. By the early 1500s, Tenochtitlan was the capital of an empire that ruled millions of people across central Mexico. And everything in the city was designed to make that power visible. At the center stood the Templo Mayor, a massive stepped pyramid rising above the city. Two temples at the top, one for the rain god Tlaloc, one for the war god Huitzilopochtli. Religion and power weren't separate here, they were the same thing. From this point, the city spread outward in a precise grid. Streets ran straight, canals cut between neighborhoods, bridges could be raised at night for security. This wasn't an organic medieval city like London, this was planned. Every district had a purpose, every route was controlled, movement was managed. And that's where the real surprise begins. Because for a city of this size to survive, it needed food, a lot of food. And Tenochtitlan didn't rely on distant farms, it grew its food inside the lake itself. These are chinampas, often called floating gardens, though they weren't actually floating. Farmers drove wooden stakes into the shallow lakebed. They wove reeds between them. They piled mud, soil, and vegetation on top. The result was a rectangular plot of land surrounded by water. These plots were incredibly fertile, so fertile that farmers could harvest multiple crops per year: maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, flowers. Canoes moved constantly between chinampas and the city, delivering fresh food daily. This wasn't subsistence farming, it was industrial-scale agriculture, centuries before Europe developed anything comparable. And it meant Tenochtitlan could feed a population most European cities couldn't even imagine supporting. From above, the city looked alive. Thousands of canoes moving through canals, people crossing causeways on foot, smoke rising from cooking fires, temple drums echoing across the lake. And then there was the market of Tlatelolco. Spanish witnesses described it with disbelief. They estimated 60,000 people could be trading there on a busy day. Food, pottery, cloth, tools, obsidian blades, salt, cacao. Prices were regulated. Officials enforced order. Judges settled disputes on the spot. This wasn't chaos, this was an economy, a functioning, organized urban system.
And when the Spaniards saw it, they understood something unsettling. This wasn't a primitive society. This was a rival civilization. But beneath the beauty and precision, the city carried tension. Because Tenochtitlan was also built on fear. Tribute flowed in from conquered regions. Captives were brought to the capital. Sacrifices were public. Power here wasn't hidden, it was displayed. And the empire depended on that display continuing. In the next part, we're going to move closer, inside the neighborhoods, inside the palaces, inside the water systems that kept the city alive. Because Tenochtitlan didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because a system this complex had points of failure. And once those failed, the city unraveled fast. A city this large doesn't survive on spectacle alone. Temples don't feed people. Ceremonies don't stop floods. Power collapses quickly if systems fail. And Tenochtitlan only existed because its systems worked every single day. The greatest challenge was water. Lake Texcoco was unpredictable. During the rainy season, water levels rose fast. Fresh water mixed with salt water. Floods could wipe out crops and homes. So the Mexica didn't just live on the lake, they engineered it.
This is the Albaradón of Nezahualcóyotl, a massive dike, kilometers long, built from stone, earth, and timber. It divided salt water from fresh water. It controlled flooding. It protected the chinampas. This wasn't decorative architecture. It was large-scale environmental control. Without it, the city dies. And maintaining it required coordination, labor, and constant oversight. That tells us something important. Tenochtitlan wasn't just powerful, it was administratively sophisticated. Now look at how water entered the city. Freshwater aqueducts carried clean drinking water from springs on the mainland. 2 channels ran side by side. One could be shut down for cleaning while the other stayed active. No lead pipes, no pumping systems, just gravity, precision, and routine maintenance. In Europe at the same time, most cities drank from polluted rivers. Here, clean water flowed directly into neighborhoods and palaces. Zoom in closer. This is daily life. The city was divided into kalpuli, neighborhood districts. Each kalpuli managed land, labor, education, local temples, and tribute obligations. People didn't disappear into a massive anonymous city. They were embedded in smaller social units. Children were taught history, religion, and discipline. Crafts were passed down. Farmers, builders, and traders all had defined roles. This wasn't freedom in the modern sense, it was order through structure. At the top of this structure sat the Tlatoani. The ruler wasn't just a political leader, he was a religious figure, a military commander, and a symbolic center of the universe. Moctezuma II lived inside a palace complex so large it functioned like a city within the city. Administrative halls, treasure rooms, gardens irrigated with fresh water, armories, and a zoo filled with animals brought as tribute from across the empire. Power here wasn't hidden behind walls. It was curated, displayed, and ritualized. But most people never entered the palace. Their lives unfolded along canals and streets. You wake before sunrise. The sound of paddles hitting water echoes outside. Canoes glide past your home. There are no carts, no horses. Everything moves by foot or by water. Markets open early. Tlatelolco fills with traders. Officials inspect goods. Judges settle disputes immediately. Prices are standardized. Cheating is punished. This isn't chaos, it's regulation. And above it all, always visible, stands the Templo Mayor. Religion here is not private, it's public, unavoidable, and political. Sacrifice isn't hidden behind closed doors, it's performed in full view. Not because the Mexica were uniquely violent, but because sacrifice was the engine that justified power. The gods required nourishment. The sun required energy. The empire required obedience. Sacrifice connected all three. But systems like this depend on belief, on routine, on predictability.
And when unpredictability enters the system, everything changes. When outsiders arrive, when alliances shift, when disease spreads faster than ritual can contain it.
The Mexica had built a city optimized for control. What they hadn't built was resilience against total disruption. And that disruption was already moving toward them across the lake. In the final part, we're going to watch it happen. Causeways cut, water supplies poisoned, former allies turning into enemies. Not a slow decline, a rapid collapse. The first time the Spaniards saw Tenochtitlan, they didn't speak. They stood on the causeway, staring. Ahead of them, a city rose directly from the water. White plastered buildings reflected the sunlight. Canals cut through neighborhoods like streets. Bridges lifted and lowered with precision. Temples towered above everything. Bernal Diaz, a foot soldier, later wrote that it felt unreal, like a vision, like something taken from a dream. None of them had seen a city like this in Europe, and none of them truly understood what they were looking at. Hernán Cortés entered the city in 1519, not as a conqueror, as a guest. Moctezuma II met him with ritual and restraint, gold gifts, formal speeches, carefully controlled hospitality. This wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The Mexica had faced outsiders before. They absorbed enemies, they folded rivals into their system. Cortés was watched, measured, contained. At least that was the plan. But Cortés didn't rely on strength alone. He relied on resentment. For decades, the Mexica Empire had demanded tribute, food, labor, captives. Cities like Tlaxcala didn't see the Spaniards as invaders. They saw an opportunity. So when Cortés marched, he didn't march alone. He marched with thousands of indigenous allies. An empire built on control suddenly faced a coalition built on revenge. And then came the enemy no one could fight: smallpox. It arrived silently, carried unknowingly by Europeans. There was no immunity, no understanding of disease transmission. People fell sick within days, fevers, blisters, blindness. Entire households died before rituals could be performed. Priests died, engineers died, war leaders died. The systems that kept Tenochtitlan functioning began to unravel. Leadership collapsed at the worst possible moment. Moctezuma was killed. How remains unclear. Some say by his own people, some say by the Spaniards. Either way, the symbolic center of the empire was gone. The Mexica fought back. The Spaniards were driven out during La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Hundreds drowned trying to escape across the lake, weighed down with stolen gold. For a moment, it looked like Tenochtitlan might survive. But survival requires more than victory. It requires supplies. When Cortés returned, he returned prepared. Ships were dismantled and rebuilt into brigantines, armed boats that controlled the lake. The causeways were cut, bridges destroyed, aqueducts were severed. Fresh water stopped flowing. The lake that once fed the city now strangled it. Food ran out. Chinampas were destroyed. Markets collapsed. Starvation followed disease. People drank contaminated water. Children died first, then the elderly. Street by street, the city disintegrated. Not in one dramatic battle, but through exhaustion. The Templo Mayor was attacked, sacred spaces violated, stone torn apart. By August 1521, Tenochtitlan was unrecognizable. Canals filled with rubble and bodies, homes burned, temples shattered. Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor, was captured while trying to escape by canoe. The city had fallen. But what followed was not rebuilding, it was replacement. Spanish churches rose directly on top of Mexica temples. Stones from palaces were reused. Canals were filled in. The lake slowly drained. The city that lived with water was turned into a city that fought it. Mexico City was built on top of Tenochtitlan's corpse. For centuries, Europe told a simple story, that civilization arrived with steel, horses, and Christianity, that what existed before was primitive. But archaeology tells another story. Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities on Earth, cleaner than London, more organized than Paris.
It had solved urban problems Europe wouldn't solve for hundreds of years. Water management, food supply, density. This wasn't a failed experiment, it was a different path. When Tenochtitlan fell, the world didn't just lose a city, it lost an alternative. A way of building megacities that worked with nature, not against it. A system where ritual, infrastructure, and belief were inseparable. The modern world chose conquest and extraction. Tenochtitlan chose balance and repetition. Only one was allowed to continue. Today, millions walk the streets of Mexico City. Cars drive where canals once flowed. Cathedrals stand where temples rose. Subway tunnels cut through sacred ground. The city never disappeared, it was buried. This was Tenochtitlan, not a myth, not a legend, a functioning megacity built on water that the world wasn't ready to understand.